Swearing is okay.
Okay, thank you.
And good evening and welcome to RT's coverage of Debate Night in America. I'm Ben Swan. I'll be your host for this evening. For the next few hours, we're going to be watching the debate live. So as we come on live right now with the stream, obviously it always takes a few minutes for our guests to come on with us, our viewers. So as you're coming and joining us here this evening, I'll give you a little bit of a rundown of what you can expect for tonight. Obviously tonight is the vice presidential debate between Kamala Harris and who is of course Joe Biden's running mate, and Vice President Mike Pence. This is the only vice presidential debate of this debate season. There are a total of 4 debates in all. We've already seen the very first presidential debate that happened a week ago. If you watched it, then you know. There was a lot to unpack there. Very little was said in terms of substance. I guess it depends on who you ask. It seems like to most observers, though, we would agree, very little there in terms of substance. The question for tonight will be how much more substance is there, and will this be a totally different kind of debate between, as I said, Kamala Harris, who is not only the running mate of Joe Biden, but was herself a presidential contender earlier in this election season. Obviously, Harris dropped out of the Democratic race for the White House before becoming the vice presidential candidate. And then on the other side, we have Mike Pence tonight. And of course, he is a Republican. You might argue is one of the least visible vice presidents in modern history, certainly since the Bush administration. We're going to be talking about that tonight as well. And then, of course, as the actual debate takes place, we'll be streaming it live. We'll be fact-checking some of what we see there. We'll be commenting on it, as well as giving you, as a viewer, the opportunity to comment as well. And we'll be having a number of guests on with us on the program to talk about all of these things. But as we begin, one of the questions we're going to be asking tonight is substance-wise, what is the difference between these two campaigns right now? As we watch, obviously, there's a lot of issues in the forefront and in the background of this presidential election. Coronavirus being one of the biggest, clearly. It has the most effect probably on your life and my life every single day. And so as we watch tonight, what will be said specifically about that? What will be the parameters in terms of not only discussing coronavirus response, but the fact that the President of the United States himself, in between that last debate and this debate tonight, was diagnosed with COVID, was hospitalized with COVID, and has since emerged from hospitalization with COVID-19. And of course, the Vice President Mike Pence has come under some fire for not quarantining during that time. And what does it mean to be a vice president during this time? We also know, just as we talk about tonight, there will be plexiglass on the stage separating the candidates. Pence camp essentially said that we're not sure why. The Harris camp asked for that, simply saying that doesn't necessarily make sense since the candidates will be 12 feet apart, not even just 6 feet, but 12 feet apart. But one of the big questions tonight, and we're going to kind of kick this off by taking a look at some of the issues surrounding this. As you, a viewer, as you, a potential voter here in this election, do you really know the difference between these two candidates? Do you know what makes them stand out and makes them unique as candidates? What positions do they have that are truly positions that contrast each other? And how many of their positions do you believe, based upon what the media tells you, that you simply think one side is bad and the other side is good? We're going to be talking about all that tonight. So to help me out with that, we'll have a slew of guests. I want to bring in 2 of them right now. Stephen Bonnell will be joining us right now, along with Marnie Halassa will be joining us as well. And if our guests are ready to come in, are we able to bring them into the conversation at this point? Guys, thanks so much for being a part of this tonight and part of our debate night. As we said, as we get ready about less than an hour from now, we're going to see those vice presidential candidates take the stage. But let me just begin with this question for you all. Do you believe that most voters, most of the people who are kind of watching this campaign right now, even really know any kind of substantial difference between these candidates? Or is it a lot of it just this idea that one side is bad and the other side is good? Stephen, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that people generally vote on specific policies for candidates, but more just kind of like the general ideologies that they feel like both candidates are belonging to. So progressives view Biden, or Democrats view Biden as a more democratic figure, meaning more like a Democrat or left on social issues and economic issues. And then conservatives will view Donald Trump as more of a Republican leader that's more right on social issues and economic issues. I don't think most people are familiar with the specific policies of either candidate, but I don't think that's unique to this election.
Yeah, probably not unique, Marnie, but at the same time, it makes it difficult, right? When people are being told you must vote, this is the most important election of our lifetimes, and yet many pundits can't
Right.
even explain to you why that is.
I mean, that's the thing is I look at these two candidates and, obviously, I would say Kamala Harris, you might argue, has, she's more on identity politics. She's easier to listen to. She's not so fascist and right wing as Trump and Mike Pence. But honestly, I really care more about policy, and I feel like both of these candidates have not really told me what they plan to do. Both have very vague answers, no specifics. And even though I do plan to vote for Joe Biden to get rid of fascism in the White House, I'm interested in knowing what the Democrats propose to get us out of this mess. But for me personally, where is the universal health care during a pandemic? Where is the extended unemployment insurance? Where is a jobs program? 30 million people are unemployed. Especially in New York City, they need expanded food stamps. People are experiencing medical debt and student debt. So where are those programs to help people in a public health crisis? It's less than 28 days, until the election, and there are no answers. And honestly, to me, it seems like the crisis is invisible to both Kamala Harris and Mike Pence. And what I'd like to see is both candidates talk about an expansion of a social safety net, and I don't hear any of that.
There's probably going to be limitations on that. Let me ask you all this. Did you watch SNL over the weekend? And did you see I'm sure you've seen it. If you didn't watch it live, then you probably saw it on YouTube. The Jim Carrey playing Joe Biden and Alec Baldwin playing Donald Trump. And in the midst of this, it was a kind of a reenactment of their debate. And you see Kamala Harris is the one who comes out. She's like the adult in the room. And there's almost this, there's a line they use, right, where she says, I'll be the vice president in charge while waiting or something like that, to that extent. Is tonight partly a appeal to Democratic voters on the part of the Biden-Harris campaign that says, you may not be very fired up about Joe Biden, but this is his running mate. You should be fired up about her. And if that is the case, why would the Democratic Party believe that that would ring true with voters when Kamala Harris could only get 1% in the polling before she dropped out?
Well, I mean, right now, I don't think the
whoever wants to go. Go ahead.
I don't think the Biden. Oh wait, I'm not muted, right? No, I'm not. I'm sorry. Okay. I don't think the Biden campaign needs to do much work right now to pull themselves ahead in these debates. I don't think the Biden campaign is looking to score any massive kill shots on any of these three debates that they have planned to do. The reality is that right now, unless we're going to engage in pretty massive conspiracy regarding polling, the Biden campaign is like double-digit leading around the country and is killing it in states that Trump had previously done really well at in 2016. So I think right now, as long as the Biden camp just kind of holds on to their messaging, they don't have any massive gaffes or any big chokes on stage, and as long as Pence in this debate doesn't land any massive blows to Kamala, I just don't really see this being like a big worry for the Biden campaign.
Yeah, no, I actually
Marnie,
agree with that.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I know, I agree with that. I think, Kamala is, she's very measured. She's going to look like the adult in the room compared to Trump. She speaks well. So I think having her, represent the Biden campaign is actually a smart political move. And I think, but also kind of what I feel like what's going on in the background is, I think what Mike Pence is going to do, and really what he always does, is he just parrots Trump. So just Trump has always been saying, that this is just the flu and not to worry about it. And, I feel like that's the wrong side of public opinion. 2/3 of Americans are still afraid of the virus. 75% of Americans do not trust Donald Trump. 210,000 people have died of the virus. So, we're really in a crisis. And I think if, Harris just, keeps forward and just is normal, I think Biden will come on top.
Okay, so let me ask you guys both this. I think you're both probably not fans of President Trump. I don't know that. I mean, clearly, Marnie, you made that clear already that you're voting for Joe Biden. Stephen, I would assume you're in the same camp. Is that safe to say?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. So having said that, where do you think Trump comes out in terms of what just happened with coronavirus? I mean, obviously, he's taken a pretty strong stand on it. So just setting aside kind of your own personal view of corona, do you think in terms of the way the public views it, there is clearly a segment of the population that's tired of lockdowns? Clearly, there are voters, especially in swing states like in Florida and Michigan specifically, who desperately want this stuff to come to an end. The fact that he came out of the hospital so quickly and is now saying things about don't fear the coronavirus, don't let fear of it run your life. How significant is that for those voters to fire them up, especially on a night when we're going to have to see plexiglass between the campaigns, between the podiums, and really a lot of the pundits have started saying, including people like Claire McCaskill, a former senator herself, coming out and saying, no, you should be afraid of coronavirus. Is this an issue that's going to get people fired up and actually cause them to say, now we have a very clear differentiation between policy moving forward over this virus?
Unfortunately, it's hard to find. Oh, I'm sorry. You just go ahead.
No, that's fine.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that, I mean, Trump has been downplaying the coronavirus, since it began. And I mean, it's obviously he's on the wrong side of public opinion. I mean, people are scared. I mean, I live in New York City. We have now the second wave is happening and zip codes are being shut down. I mean, everybody is petrified. And I think Trump is this reality TV star, but he can't micromanage this kind of reality. I mean, people know. I mean, I've known people who have passed away because of the coronavirus. We see it directly affects everybody's life. He can't just say, oh, I'm fine, it's great, and like it doesn't even exist. And I think that is his lack of the coronavirus response is really, I think, is what is going to decimate him. But at the same time that I say that, I still feel like as a progressive, I feel like the Democrats need to give me more. They need to have very clear policies. I want to see them do more for working people. I want them to expand a social safety net because we are in a public health crisis. The only thing to do this election, whether it's this election or local elections, it's all about economics and giving people relief, and that's really what I want to see.
Okay, but before Stephen responds, I got to ask you, Marina, about this, because you said you're in New York City, and a lot of people are scared, but there's a lot of people getting sick of it, too, in New York City. I actually have family in New York who are saying they're sick and tired of this, and they're as afraid of a second lockdown as they are of coronavirus. They're saying we don't want to be locked down again. There's a new report out, as you know, that says half of small businesses, including restaurants in New York, are not coming back now. So there's got to be an economic play that goes into that.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I mean, obviously, you have to balance it. I know now, like the small businesses in Hell's Kitchen in Chelsea, they're at 25% capacity. I guess, you'd have to balance that with, with stopping the spread. So I know there's certain zip codes in New York City that are shutting down. And, if the spread is not prevalent in other zip codes, I mean, those businesses are going to remain open. And I know there is a huge economic fallout. What I would honestly like to see is small businesses, what they need is they need a rent voucher. The city needs to pay 65 to 85% of their rent with a rent voucher so they actually can survive. And they do that with tenants in New York City. So they can do that with tenants. Why can't they do it with small businesses? But I think there needs to be some kind of solutions. And also everybody in New York City, we want Cuomo to tax corporations. We want him to tax the wealthy. We're in a $9 billion shortfall. And not to make this so about New York City, but, governors all over, I mean, we got to find funds and, they got to tap into their donors and they got to help the municipalities, the cities. The small business need help. I mean, we need help. So that's what I would like to propose.
So, Stephen, let me ask you this. When we talk about a vice presidential debate, it's rarely do these go down in history as even being memorable at all. But if I think back to the Democratic debates, last year, probably the best attack on Kamala Harris that I saw throughout the entire debate process came from Tulsi Gabbard. When she started to read down some of Harris's record as the Attorney General of California, and specifically on issues like, saying that we should have longer prison sentences because those are cheap labor in the prisons. The discussion of that man who was on death row that her office worked to keep on death row because they didn't want to admit that they had made a mistake. Isn't that, Stephen, an issue where Mike Pence has an opportunity, if he can be articulate about this and passionate about it, has an opportunity to show her as a candidate who's not this great progressive, but actually is part of that criminal justice problem?
Well, I mean, this is all going to come down to rhetoric at the end of the day, is who sounds better putting forth their arguments out, You can talk about Kamala Harris's record on crime and everything, and you talk about whether she was too tough or too not, but the fact of the matter is Kamala Harris has pioneered some incredibly successful programs that have been copied by other states in the country because of how successful they were. There's a lot of talk in the early 2000s of her Back on Track program, where she was able to reduce recidivism of certain offenders, of nonviolent, non-sexual, first-time offenders, from 50% to less than 10% in some areas. And this program has been copied around the United States with pretty amazing results. So, I mean, it's easy to point to one case where, oh, Kamala said this or that. But I mean, her record, I think, on crime is pretty good. I don't think Kamala has anything to hide from when it comes to her record on crime. It'll all come down at the end of the night on who hammers home the most effective talking point, or, who lands the biggest blow that the other person can't adequately respond to. But I think insofar as her record goes, I think Kamala Harris is in a pretty good spot to be to very easily defend everything she's done. And I don't think that Mike Pence is the kind of guy that can bring enough fire to Kamala Harris to really nail her to the wall on anything that she's done. No offense to Pence, but that guy is very soft-spoken. And we've seen Kamala Harris's performance in the debates, even against Biden, the person she's running under now. She has been incredibly aggressive in the past. And I would be far more afraid to be on Pence's side with him launching attacks at Kamala Harris than I would be to be on Kamala Harris's side receiving attacks from Mike Pence.
Yeah, I listen, I think that Kamala Harris has a lot of weakness in terms of this area, and I think she could get hit hard on it. But I agree with you that I don't think Mike Pence is the guy to do the swinging. I mean, he was literally picked as Trump's VP because he is the anti-Trump. He's soft-spoken. He rarely shows his head. And to that point, let me ask you guys this, because if you think back to vice presidents, it's never really been a very strong role within the government system. But if you think back to the Bush era, so I think George W. Bush in recent memory probably had a vice president that he assigned more responsibility, more duty to. Now, we can have a whole argument about the fact that Dick Cheney was running the wars and may have been kind of the brain trust behind the war in Iraq, the war in Afghanistan that kept so many troops there for so long. But the fact that he had such a high-profile role was somewhat unusual. Mike Pence has not had that role. In fact, we haven't seen him until he was put in charge of COVID and then promptly removed from being in charge of COVID very quickly after that. Is there a kind of contrast between these two in terms of the profile of the position that Kamala Harris will have as VP? Will she be a hands-on and even some people would argue de facto leader if Joe Biden gets elected? What do you guys think?
Okay, I'll go first here. I think so. It's really hard to speak in terms of what's happened in the past to see what's going to happen in the future. There have been so many cases over the past, this election cycle and the last, where people are like, this has never happened, until it does happen. I believe in this Democratic primary, no Democrat has ever won the nomination without Iowa and New Hampshire. And I think Biden lost both and won the primary, the entire primary thing pretty handily. In terms of are vice presidents that important or not, I feel like this election, I feel like the vice presidents might be considered more important than in previous ones just because both candidates are so incredibly old. It's no secret that Biden, as much as I support him, definitely isn't as quick mentally on stage as he's used to be. And then, we've got Trump, who sometimes looks like he's struggling to breathe or can't walk up steep ramps or not so steep ramps or drink water correctly. It wouldn't surprise me if Americans in the back of their mind were kind of holding on to the idea that maybe the vice presidents are going to be a little bit more pivotal in this election season than they were in the last one or the one before that.
Let me ask you guys, without being offensive, though. I want to ask something else, though. And I'm not trying to be provocative when I ask this. I'm asking this as a serious question. There are a lot of voters, certainly on the Republican side, who do believe that Joe Biden is almost senile. I mean, there is, and you guys know this. You know that online, that's a lot of the talk about him. and that there's concern that he is aging, that he can't remember where he is and who he is. As voters who have both said that you support Biden, do you both feel confident, and I mean being genuine here, not just political talking points, but do you feel confident in his ability to lead? And do you think at some point that Kamala Harris may have to take over, as you said, because I believe if Joe Biden is elected president, he will be the oldest person ever elected president in this country. Marnie, you want to start with that?
Well, I mean, listen, those presidents, they all have advisors around them. You know, I mean, if it's true that, you know, Biden has a touch of whatever, you know, Harris is right there, but they all have advisors. So, I mean, I'm not necessarily worried really about that. My real main concern is that the Democrats, if they win, they're not going to do as much as they need to do for working people. You know, we're in a public health crisis. We need an expanded social safety net. We need really clear policies about like universal health care, you know, free college tuition, eradicating medical debt, student debt, expanded unemployment benefits. I mean, this is the stuff. I mean, 30 million people are unemployed. I mean, as a progressive, and I know a lot of the progressives I know, we don't want this kind of like centrist administration that's not going to do anything. You know, I just feel like with both of the candidates, I wonder, you know, like, do they have any friends that were affected, you know, by the coronavirus? Do they have any friends that
you don't have to ask that now. You don't have to ask that now. We know that certainly on Vince's side, half of the White House has been exposed to COVID. And I want to get to Stephen on that question about whether or not you think that Biden is competent. Because Marnie, I want to follow up with you on something else. But do you think he is competent to actually fulfill his full term?
I mean, I would hope so, but honest to God, at this point, I would rather take an insane, senile Biden to the very sane Trump that thinks that invisible planes are actually invisible, or that surrounds himself with an administration of people that immediately have to be fired 6 months later because they disagree with him on something. Yeah, I mean, like, we could go back and forth all day trying to evaluate the senility or the sanity of either candidate, but the reality is that if Biden is insane, I mean, that's even more embarrassing for Trump. One, because he's slated to lose double digits nationally to an insane person. And two, the insane person appears to have a better grasp on reality than Trump does. For instance, he didn't spend months and months saying that COVID-19 isn't real. He didn't spend his entire lifetime saying Obama was born in Kenya, or that climate change is a hoax pushed onto us by Chinese manufacturing. This is just something that I don't really stay awake late at night sleeping about, or I'm sorry, that I don't stay awake late at night thinking about, that somehow Biden is going to go insane. Even if he did, if Kamala took over, I would trust that Biden's administration is going to deliver us better answers on policy, whether it's domestic and foreign, than a Trump administration with a sane Trump leading it ever could.
But under that line of thinking, I mean, isn't the thought then, and again, I playing devil's advocate here, doesn't that make Biden just simply a puppet for someone else? And do you trust whoever that someone else is? And I'm not saying that like he doesn't necessarily deep state's puppet. I'm just saying if he is not of the mind to actually be able to lead, then someone is leading, or someone's are leading.
I mean, oh, sorry.
Well, it's really the neoliberal establishment. Like, Biden is part of the Obama, the neoliberal establishment. And I mean, I think voters have a choice. You know, do you go with kind of a, you know, essentially a fascist regime that Trump has been? Or do you go for the neoliberal regime? And I know a lot of progressives are like, oh my gosh, like, do I want cancer? Do I want to die of cancer? Or do I want to die of a gunshot? But, you know, and it's hard for me because I go back and forth, but it seems to me that the Trump administration is so dangerous, and the lack of response with coronavirus, I mean, really the blood of 210,000 people are on his hands. The fact that he couldn't even say, wear a mask, have a federal mandate to wear a mask. It's a thin piece of cloth. I mean, really? Like, that to me is it's so criminal. You know, just it's very, very disturbing.
But Marnie, I gotta push back on that. Do you really believe that every coronavirus death Donald Trump is responsible for? He's responsible for every single death, that had he told everyone to wear masks, no one would have died? You can't possibly believe that.
Listen, Cuomo and de Blasio also bear a lot of responsibility because they didn't shut New York City down earlier. 1 week earlier would have saved, like they said, 50 to 80% of the deaths. So yes, but I just feel.
But then what about all the leaders who put COVID patients into nursing homes? Right, that was an absolute failure. But it also came from the fact that they didn't know what they knew.
Yes, I agree too. But he consistently downplayed the virus ever since it started. And if you look at what Bob Woodward said, that he knew how dangerous it was, but he didn't want the stock market to go down. So, I mean, consistently he's downplayed the virus, and I think he bears a lot of responsibility.
Stephen, I saw you shaking your head. Were you in disagreement with that?
Yeah, I mean, a couple things. Just firstly, in terms of Biden being crazy or senile, or in terms of looking at somebody pulling the strings behind the scenes, I think that is a really good point. I think that we should be worried about people that might have leverage over the potential future president of the United States. There could be somebody secretly pulling the strings behind Biden's campaign that we don't know about. But more importantly, could also be people pulling the strings behind Trump's campaign that we do know about. After the massive New York Times blowout of Trump's leaked taxes, we know that he has over $400 million of debt that he is the personal guarantor on that is going to be coming to fruition soon. I think that when people talk about whether or not people could have leverage over the president because of reasons, it's strange that they never seem to bring up Trump's massive personal financial liabilities, both at home and abroad. In terms of, is Trump responsible for every single death that happened under the coronavirus? No, of course not every single one, but could we have absolutely mitigated a lot of the damage? Yeah, sure. We can talk about New York needing to do it or other states needing to do it, but the reality is that this type of leadership needs to come from the federal government down. Like, New York is not the NHS. New York is not the CDC. New York is not the executive branch of the United States that should be in charge of coordinating the response all across the country from the top down. Individual states can only do so much. This is one of the rare times that every left-leaning person and right-leaning person should be able to come together and agree the federal government absolutely needed to step in here in a leadership role, like Trump told us he was going to do with problems as a leader, and they needed to give us direction from the top down so that every state wasn't left scratching their head wondering, how are we supposed to respond to this virus that is killing American citizens?
Okay, so we are about 33 minutes away from the start of the debate. Just to remind people who are joining us and tuning in right now, we are waiting for the vice presidential debate to begin. We're talking with our guests, Stephen Mono and Marnie Halassa. Am I saying that correctly? Halassa?
That's right, yeah.
Okay, make sure I'm saying it right. We're also going to bring in Michael Rechtenwald. Oh, we don't have him yet. Okay, Michael's going to be joining us in a minute, so we're going to have another guest who was going to jump in here with us. But as we're getting ready to watch this debate tonight, Marnie, I want to ask you about something else that I made a note to myself, because you've said a couple of different times, you keep kind of alluding to what you want to see out of this administration, and you almost, if there's a Biden administration, and you almost sound as if you feel like you may be in a position where you're being played as a progressive, where they're not really going to do all the things that you as a progressive hope they will do. Am I reading that correctly? Do you feel like you might be getting played?
Yes, you are. You're reading that very, very correctly. I feel, a lot of us progressives, we feel like the Democrats, there's no specific plans. Even when they get in office, they never go far enough. We thought Bernie Sanders was actually going to have more influence in the Biden campaign. That didn't happen. We're pretty disappointed. So, you're definitely reading that correctly. I want to hear specific policies. I want to hear, like I said before, an expanded social safety net, because we are in a public health crisis. And to me, right now, anything economically that would help, I think, is, what needs to happen. I mean, even look at what happened with the stalled economic stimulus negotiations. Trump killed it. He had that October 6th tweet, which I think also killed his chances of winning. But it also seems like Pelosi isn't doing anything either. So I just feel like, the Democratic Party is supposed to be the party for the working people, and I feel like they're really not. So.
Well, and I think that again, to what you're saying, I think there's a lot of suspicion on the part of progressives who fear that that is what is happening here. Joe Biden made a comment in that last debate because obviously Trump was pushing him to say, you're a radical, and he said, I am the Democratic Party. Well, what does that actually mean, right? It sounded good. I think it was actually a good line. But what does it actually mean, Stephen? I mean, that's the real question. And I think because at least, when we were in this position 4 years ago, you had Clinton, who was in many people's minds, kind of the epitome of establishment. And on the other side, you had Trump, who was a completely unknown quantity of what you get. Well, at least now, whether you like Trump or you hate him, and I think very few people feel in between. They either like him or they hate him. At least you know what you have. Whereas with Biden, is there a concern that you don't know what you're getting there?
I mean, I see a lot of this talk that we don't know what Biden's going to do. I mean, he's talked about his plans to expand the ACA several times. You've got a whole website full of things where you can look at different policies that they're talking about. The reality is we just don't get much policy talk in the United States. Most Americans don't want to hear that. They usually want to hear how you feel about a particular thing. If you want to look at particular policies, there's an entire website, or there's an entire section on healthcare on JoeBiden.com where he's got his plan to protect and build on Obamacare. They talk about the tax credits for middle-class families. They talk about the expansion of the ACA. They talk about the introduction of a public option. All of this stuff is there. And I mean, if you were somebody that was a big fan of Bernie Sanders, I mean, you should be excited because it was just announced that Bernie Sanders, assuming that the Democrats win the Senate, Bernie Sanders is going to be the chairman of the subcommittee on health. So, I mean, I feel like that's a really good concession being made to a progressive party that lost pretty hard in the primaries, Biden wants to appeal to progressives, of course, but you also have to keep in mind that the general Democratic populace did not vote for Bernie Sanders. They don't want the far left, the most extreme possible version of healthcare that we can get. But we have to be cognizant that Biden is planning on implementing the most progressive changes that we've seen in American history when it comes to healthcare. And Bernie Sanders is going to have an active role in that, which I think is like the best type of come-together compromise you could possibly get if you're a progressive who your candidate lost during the primary season.
Well, there's no question that if you're talking about the issue of what a candidate's policy positions are, that does not necessarily win you a primary or general election. If you believe that it did, then look at Andrew Yang. He had some of the most specific policy and wide policy ideas for years, and didn't go anywhere. Before we continue this conversation, we did go around and we talked to a number of people about, how they view Trump and Biden in terms of their plans going along with this conversation here. And many of them couldn't tell you. They just thought one is bad and one is good. Take a look at this.
Name-calling, personal attacks, emotional accusations. American society is now so deeply polarized between these two figures.
Take a look at this.
Donald Trump and Joe Biden. The 2020's election campaign is looking more like a political circus than anything.
I'm not here to call out his lies. Everybody knows he's a liar.
Don't ever use the word smart with me. Don't ever use that word.
Oh, give me a break.
Because you know what? There's nothing smart about you, Joe.
Would you shut up, man?
Listen, excuse me, Chris. No, you're a number two.
No. He's Putin's puppy.
You were a senator. And
You're
by
the
way,
worst
you were
president America has ever had.
Hey,
Come
Joe,
on.
China ate your lunch, Joe.
It's hard to get any word in with this clown.
It's as if many people see this upcoming election as a showdown between good and evil. If you like Biden, he's the country's only salvation from his racist, fascist opponent. But if you like Trump, only he can protect America's new greatness from his senile rival. It's like a reality TV show where actual policy is absent from the conversation. The thing is, though, if you can get past the rhetoric and the emotion, is there really any difference between them?
It's honestly the difference between right and wrong.
Joe Biden is an incredibly experienced candidate. Donald Trump is a joke.
I think the key is that, Biden is a lifelong politician. Trump, on the other hand, came up, no government experience, no office experience whatsoever.
I don't feel like Trump really has any idea of policy. He just does stuff and says what he wants. And where, I might have some issues with policies Joe Biden has, at least he has a policy, a consistent framework that he's going to go forward with.
I don't know about a specific policy, but I think it really is the difference between life or death for so many marginalized communities. I mean, obviously they're both old white dudes.
Trump hasn't been all that different from the Obama administration, in which Biden was the VP. Remember the wall Trump wanted to build in 2016 as part of his popular promise for a new stance on immigration?
We will build a great wall along the southern border. Impenetrable, physical, tall, powerful, beautiful southern border wall.
A wall is an immorality. It's not who we are as a nation.
Racist and xenophobic wall.
Democrats quickly attacked it as racist, and along came the sad pictures of caged immigrant kids, with Trump to blame for their misery. Except some of those pictures were from 2014, under the Obama administration. That's right, Trump actually continued many of the same immigration policies from before. In fact, ICE arrests and deportations are still lower than they were under much of Obama's watch. Let's not forget about the peace promise Trump made on his way to the White House.
I'm proud to have the support of war-fighting generals, active duty military, and top experts who know both how to win and how to avoid endless wars.
It echoed Obama's 2008 election promises.
We will begin to responsibly leave Iraq to its people and forge a hard-earned peace in Afghanistan.
And also, like Obama, Trump has so far failed to deliver. The difference here, though, is that the former president got a Nobel Peace Prize in 2009, even though many of America's foreign entanglements worsened under his administration. In 2016, Trump even campaigned against the interventionist posturing of both parties.
But we will no longer use American military might to construct democracies in faraway lands or try to rebuild other countries in our own image. Those days are now over.
There's also Obama's bloated budget deficit, which continues to grow under Trump. The current president made tax cuts for the rich, sure, but the economy more or less continued business as usual until the pandemic. When the debates come around again, though, one has to wonder if Biden will be as frank about these parallels as he's been in the past.
The truth of the matter is, you all know in your gut what has to be done. We can disagree in the margins, but the truth of the matter is,
I hope they let me back on after this. I don't know if they're bringing in new people or not, though. I think I'm coming back on.
Standard of living will change. Nothing would fundamentally change.
When your only two options in an election are so similar in terms of policy, perhaps shouting racist or senile is the only way to keep things interesting.
And again, this is our debate night coverage. We're bringing back in now our guests with us, Marnie Hasla and Stephen Bonnell. Are you guys still with us?
I'm here.
Or have they gone? They're still here. Okay, great, guys. I just want to ask you, too, about this. As you heard there, and folks who really don't know a lot of the differences, and I think we've already kind of touched on that, but I do want to ask you all one more question before we move on here, which is a question about election integrity. I mean, do you believe, number one, that this election, because there's a lot of questions about mail-in ballots, about how voting will be cast, about voter suppression that happens in states. I'm in Georgia. We just had, as you probably know, a gubernatorial race that was marred by a lot of accusations of voter suppression and purging the rolls here. Do you think there is a concern about election results, number one? And number two, do you believe that either candidate, when we get to election night, will not claim victory that night? Stephen?
I think that there's always concern about election stuff. I mean, we should obviously have our polls staffed as well as possible. If people can vote on election night, if they can vote earlier than at the last possible moment, I think that that's always something that people should strive to do. This idea that there's going to be widespread voter fraud or something like that has just been absolutely unsubstantiated. The idea that this is going to be a huge problem, it's never been a problem in the history of our United States. For people that hate mail-in voting, you should ask yourself why Trump has mail-in voted so much himself. Why our military servicemen mail-in vote? Like, do you want to disenfranchise, people overseas from voting if you hate this type of voting so much? These things are all just absolute non-issues that have been drummed up by the Trump campaign in order to delegitimize the election night. I totally reject that idea. And then also just on this theme that both presidents are the same. When we talk about how Trump is campaigning against intervention, while simultaneously he wants to assassinate Assad, depose Maduro, rolls back friendly relations with Cuba, pulls us out of the historic Iranian nuclear arms deal, has North Korea expanding aggression in the Southeast Asia theater, like all of these ideas that these candidates are exactly the same. I mean, just look at where they stand on things like climate change. Look at where they stand on things like healthcare. Look at where they stand on things like tax cuts to the wealthiest people in America. It's just absolutely insane to me that people can try to draw parallels between these two candidates other than a few hollow talking points that just don't hold true when you look at how either of them ask. When we look at how they treat things like immigration, for instance, we try to draw parallels between Obama and Trump. You know what I think of when I think of immigration and Obama and Trump? I think of one guy that signed DACA and another guy that killed DACA. The fact that these two administrations are put up to be the same thing is just absolutely delusional to me.
Well, but you're saying that on immigration they're not the same, but Obama deported more people than Trump has. In fact, he had deported more people than President Bush had prior to him. That's undoubtable. The numbers are absolutely there. And in terms of war and foreign policy, we're not just talking about, some kind of slight differences. Bush had us at war in 4 countries. Obama had us in war in 7 countries and dropped 26,000 bombs in 1 year, and yet was given a Nobel Peace Prize.
I mean, yeah, Obama was definitely pretty aggressive when it comes to foreign policy, but we also have Trump that has, threatened to steal oil from Syria. We've got Trump who has abandoned allies in the Middle East, the Kurdish people. We've got Trump that put immigration restrictions in this country that were so severe that people that we had used as friendly assets in the Iraqi war were left for dead because they were unable to come to this country afterwards. We've got a guy that has been stepping up drone strikes in Yemen as he continues to make arms deals with Saudi Arabia that's contributing to the destabilization and destruction of some of these countries. We've got a guy that supports Israeli aggression against Palestinians. We can talk one way or another about, which president's going to be better, which president's going to be worse, or try to draw these parallels between one or another. But I think it's pretty clear that when we look at the foreign policies of both of these people, the directions that they want to head in are quite different.
Marnie, I'm going to give you a last word here before we say goodbye to you. Any thoughts that you want to share on that?
Well, just, what I honestly, what I'm a little worried about is if Biden wins, I'm just kind of afraid that Trump is not going to go quietly. Like that's one of my main concerns. If Biden wins, is Trump going to? I mean, you look at what happened in Portland with all the protesters. That's one thing that I'm just concerned about. So, but
are you genuinely concerned that you do not think? Are you genuinely concerned that you don't think he'll leave the White House?
I'm actually a little worried about that. I'm worried that he just won't leave, and he'll get the military to back him up. So, I mean, maybe that's too crazy, but I am just a little concerned about that.
What? I hear. Okay, Marnie, thank you so much for being with us. We're going to actually say goodbye to you at this point. Thank you again so much for your time tonight. We're going to actually bring in 2 other guests right now. We're going to bring in Lionel of Lionel Media, along with Michael Reichenwald. He is the author of Beyond Woke and a former NYU professor. If we can bring them in to the conversation. And as they are kind of joining us, Stephen, I want to come back to something that you were saying a minute ago when we were talking about Obama and the differences in these things. And you mentioned about the drone strikes in Yemen and all that. But it is important for people to understand that Obama's foreign policy did not differ greatly on any level from George W. Bush's foreign policy. That Trump's foreign policy has also not differed greatly. And what we've seen really since 2001 is a continuation of essentially the same foreign policy, irregardless of which party is in power at the time. So the idea that there isn't a big difference, I think, only tells you that if Biden comes into office, it's still not going to change. At what point are we going to see a candidate who is dramatically different in this arena?
I mean, I totally disagree. So was Obama continuing some of the foreign policy of George Bush? Sure, he was, but that's because he inherited wars from George Bush. It's not like Obama can just flip a switch and walk back on some of these things. Of course, he has to see through some of these campaigns until their end. And also, it's really important to keep in mind, when we say one is just a continuation of the other, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, more commonly referred to as the Iranian nuclear agreement, this is a historic agreement that the United States had set up in place for us to actually ensure that Iran could step into a world where it was welcomed by Western countries in terms of trade and where it did not have a nuclear arm in its future. The fact that the United States was able to spearhead this negotiation, was able to lead this negotiation and get an agreement on this, where we had 24/7 surveillance on some Iranian centrifuges, where we were loosening sanctions on them, similar things we did with Cuba. This was unprecedented. The idea that this is a continuation of Trump, who just completely threw this deal out the window, who behind the scenes has been talking about assassinating world leaders, like it's unbelievable to me that we would compare these two leaders as saying that they would have the same foreign policy going forward. I just totally disagree.
Well, but I disagree with when you say that. Listen, you're right about the Iran agreement, and you're right about Cuba policy, but you're wrong about Obama in terms of de-escalating war in some of these countries, including in Yemen, where Obama assassinated a U.S. citizen, a Muslim cleric, Anwar al-Awlaki, who was a U.S. citizen and had no trial, had a kill list, which even George W. Bush, as much of a warmonger as he may have been, didn't even have the kill list. So the fact that Obama had these things in place, and as I said, vastly stepped up U.S. drone strikes around the world, and it holds far more drone strikes under his record than Bush ever did. Obviously, the technology changed over that period of time. But now coming into Trump, who continues it, I'm just asking you, why would Biden be different in that respect? Why would Biden actually bring troops home? Why would he actually end the war in Afghanistan? Because Obama didn't and Trump didn't.
For every example you can think of something that Obama might have done under his administration that was less than savory, so for instance, killing an American citizen abroad, I mean, we literally assassinated the head of the IRGC, Soleimani, on Iraqi soil. We've almost completely lost that country and everything that we'd accomplished with that country at a great loss to not only American life, but to Iraqi life as well, because Trump went on an ego trip and decided to assassinate a leader in foreign soil without even alerting our supposed allies in the region. The idea that we could think that these two people are existing in even the same world of foreign policy is absolute nonsense to me. You know, were there more drone strikes under Obama than there were under Bush? Yeah, of course, because we replaced some of our troops on the ground, with more sophisticated methods of attacking. But these have just scaled up even increasingly under the Trump administration. And it's not like Trump has scaled back any of these things as well. So, I mean, if we're looking for a more peaceful, stable world, I don't think that going with the isolationist, protectionist president that's trying to attack NATO and allies in the Middle East, I don't think that's the way that we want to move forward.
Right, I hear what you're saying, but again, I disagree. And to treat Anwar al-Awlaki and then his 16-year-old son, who was also a U.S. citizen, who was also assassinated by drone strike, that's flies in the face of everything we're built on as a country of laws.
So does allowing a foreign leader to come in and have his bodyguards beat up American citizens, on camera and then wish them well, which Trump did with Erdogan. This undermines a lot of what it means to be American as well in terms of inviting foreign leaders onto our soil.
I don't disagree with that. Sure. I don't disagree with that. I think that we're seeing that happen, but we're seeing that happen across the board. That's what I'm saying, is that Obama was a better in terms of diplomacy, and he was more of a diplomat, no question about that. But his actual policies were pretty much the same thing. Now, let me bring in Michael, because he's probably going to hang up on us if we don't get him in here. Michael, you've heard some of this conversation. Let me just let you pick up from where we are. Are we both nuts? Where do you stand on this?
I mean, listen, your guest there is completely denying. What about the invasion of Libya and the assassination of Gaddafi, and then the arming of ISIS, in fact, in Syria? What about the escalation? Not only continuing Bush's war, but escalating it to 9 other countries. Are you kidding me? This was a travesty. Oh, that's why we call him Obama in chief. Obama was a warmonger, and he has the deep state military industrial complex behind him, and so does Biden. Trump is bucking all that. Trump is trying to de-escalate. He's trying to bring the troops home against the deep state wishes, against the military industrial complex. Are you kidding me?
I just think it's incredibly hilarious to suggest that the Democrats were the ones that were in the pockets of the deep state military industrial complex when you have Cheney getting $1 million checks cut to him by Halliburton. I don't even know what kind of mental gymnastics you have to compete in order to wind up at that conclusion.
Did you know that Obama was considered a neocon? They basically baptized him into the neocon order. Yes,
I must have missed that church ceremony, I guess.
Basically a neocon. Yeah, well, it was real. It wasn't a church ceremony. It was a rather disgusting indoctrination into the neocon ideology, which he basically completely fell for since he was a basic CIA test tube baby in the beginning.
A CIA test tube? Did they grow him in Kenya too? Or
metaphorically there. What I'm trying to suggest is he's been tailored all the way up. Biden and Obama were the most They were the most warmongering administration in the history of this country. Aggression
Stephen,
beyond
let me ask you,
belief.
let me jump in.
They not only extended the Iraqi and Afghanistan war. You know how many countries they bombed? Would you like a list?
I'm sure it's probably posted on your Twitter or on a Medium article somewhere. I'm sure.
Hold on.
Yep.
Yeah, this is a question for Stephen. Right, you were asking specifically when you were talking about Trump's position. So I'm going to ask you a question for Stephen, and then I want to ask Michael a question. But in terms of, Stephen, what Michael said there, which I had forgotten too, which is absolutely true, in terms of the overthrow of Libya, in terms of the killing of Gaddafi, which the U.S. led, in terms of not only destroying what was already in place there, but turning Libya into a place where open slave markets return to the world. I mean, how do you justify that as saying here is a guy who was nothing like Bush or like Trump? He was all a diplomat. Obama's administration overturned the Middle East in a way that not even Bush had in terms of bringing about an absolute disaster of human crisis taking place there that is still there right now.
Absolutely.
I mean, we could jump into the 2011 series.
Syria, Somalia, Yemen, Pakistan.
Okay, yeah, we got all the countries. Yeah, so Libya is a complicated affair. Okay, there were a lot of war crimes are being alleged by both sides during the Libyan civil war. I mean, why we stepped in to intervene there? I think it's important to note two things. One, technically, the U.S. didn't kill didn't kill Gaddafi. Number one, and number two, Biden opposed Libyan intervention. When you want to look back and you want to talk to leaders and see where they stand on certain invasions, I guarantee you, Trump is right alongside cheering every single foreign intervention on. He did it with Iraq. He changed his position later after leaders like Biden had written about how horrible an idea it was. And he'll come along and he'll say, whatever was good, whatever was bad, based on how things turned out afterwards. But Trump hasn't been leading the world in terms of saying that, like, oh, well, we shouldn't be involved in this or we shouldn't be involved in that. He stepped up and he was real quick to bomb a Syrian airport. He's been real quick to step up drone strikes in Yemen. He's been real quick to turn the other eye when people like Khashoggi were getting chainsawed up in Saudi Arabia. He's been quick to abandon allies like the Kurds, to say that he wants to take over oil fields. People accuse Bush and Obama of going to war for oil. Trump is literally talking about running oil fields that used to be controlled by ISIS in northeast Syria. Like, how are we going to turn the
money back that we lost there because Obama basically armed what became ISIS. He armed the rebels to overthrow the Syrian leader.
That wasn't ISIS that was being armed.
Therefore,
ISIS walked out of...
It cost us billions of dollars there, and Trump is merely trying to recoup the money that was lost there. As for Iran, the deal was outrageously horrific. Okay, they handed up.
Okay, so hold on, Michael. Before we get to that,
that cash already belonged to Iran.
I want to ask you,
though,
Michael, about this, because on the other side of it, you do have the assassination of Soleimani in Iran. Now, Soleimani, in reality, was the one who pushed ISIS out of Iraq. It was not the U.S. that pushed them out of Iraq. The U.S. and the Russian coalition did help to push them out of Syria. They did not push them out of Iraq. Soleimani did. Soleimani actually was defeating our enemies in Iraq, and Trump assassinated him. So when Trump says that he wants to end the wars and bring the troops home, why take those kinds of steps to assassinate a leader in another country and not expect there to be some kind of blowback as a result of that?
What was there a war as a result? No, there wasn't a war as a result. Did they try to
I didn't say a war, I said blowback.
By bombing bases in Iraq? Yes, they did. Did he strike back? No, he did not. Okay? Soleimani, Iran is not some friendly little neighbor that we can get along with, actually. They're actually arming terrorists all over the world. They have absolutely indicated that they want to destroy Israel and wipe them off the map. Okay, they're a terrorist funding state that has absolutely no peaceful intentions with their neighbors. So making a deal that Obama made with them, that is hardly an accomplishment. That's like making a deal with the devil. So if you want to tout that as some sort of accomplishment, go right ahead. But that's absurd. You want to make a deal with them? Why don't you make a deal with North Korea and hand them something too? Why don't we take a plane load of money over there?
These plane loads want to make a deal with North Korea.
So these plane loads of money.
Not a plane load of money like Obama dropped off in Iraq.
The plane loads of money.
Literally a plane load.
The plane loads of money were Iranian assets that were unfrozen as part of that agreement, which is totally fine. Easing economic sanctions to make it so that a state. They were Iranian assets. They were already owned and frozen by the United States. It was their money. But regardless, we have this idea. We need to stop having this one-dimensional view of foreign policy where some people are good and some people are evil. The reality is that the reality is, well, look who's talking. You just said that Iran was evil. It's like making a deal with the devil. I don't think that every single Iranian citizen is a devil, and I don't think that every single Iranian leader or leader of any of their guards are devils as well. This idea that we can never bring Iran to the table to be friendly, that's not true. We almost did it under Bush until Bush came out publicly and identified them as being part of the axis of evil. We were negotiating with Soleimani himself in order to bring them to the table and to come to some agreement about how things should work in the Middle East. And you know what? We got the Iranian deal under Obama, and then we dismantled that under Trump, and then Trump came in and killed Soleimani. So yeah, we do have a lot of trouble, but it's because of the schizophrenic way that U.S. foreign policy works, oftentimes under aggressive Republican leadership.
Hold on. Yeah. So we have 5 minutes until the debate starts. We have our own debate going on here, which is great. But to this point, what we're talking about right now in this discussion, argument, whatever you want to call it, is incredibly important. It's important to people around the world. It's important to people living in these countries that have been involved in this war on terror. It is important to people living in this country, and it's important to our soldiers who come home, and we have about $1 trillion worth of care that's going to have to be paid out to soldiers who have been wounded on the battlefield. Do you believe, I'll start with you, Michael, that any of this very important discussion is going to be discussed at all tonight in this debate because it was ignored last week? Will it come up at all tonight? And why can this issue be ignored by the moderators who are asking these questions?
Well, first of all, the moderators will ignore it because of the dreadful record of the Obama-Biden administration. So the moderator is going to, of course, actually was an intern for Biden. So, I mean, we're talking about a completely tilted and utterly stacked deck. So basically, Pence is going to have to debate two people again, just like Trump did. So, I mean, yeah, they're going to hand them softball. They're going to hand Kamala Harris a bunch of softballs. They will never, I don't think they're going to get into foreign policy at all. You'll see probably, Kamala Harris basically focusing on Trump and what an evil orange man he is. And that's all I think that's all you're going to get. Orange man bad, orange man bad. You're going to hear a bunch of rhetoric. It's very facile and fashionable to bash Trump without looking at anything that he's done, and to characterize him as Hitler too, when he's less interventionist than Obama by a long shot. Biden is a deep state, entrenched political hack. His own son took $3.5 million from the ex-mayor's wife of Moscow. He's taken money from Ukraine, China. The guy is a billionaire thanks to the influence peddling of his dad. This is a family that is more corrupt than any other person who's ever run for presidency. And that they're calling Trump corrupt. Trump is obviously clean as a whistle. Why? Because they've been investigating him for 4 years and nothing has come up.
All right, let me go back over to Stephen before we go, because we have less than 3 minutes till the debate comes up. I do want to just kind of steer it back to that discussion that we had about foreign policy. These are incredibly important issues, and issues that we have an entire generation of Americans who have lived in this country, who have never known a time when we were not involved in a war on terror. Will it come up tonight, and why won't it if it doesn't?
Unfortunately, foreign policy just isn't that interesting to most Americans. We're separated, on both sides by oceans. We don't really have like direct involvement. We don't see it on TV every day. So I don't think that foreign policy is the most important thing or at the forefront of most people's minds, especially right now when what everybody is kind of focused on is the economy. I do agree with our other guest here that I think it is unfair to bash Trump without looking at anything he's done. I think it's way more fun to bash him after looking at things he's done. And when we're talking about foreign policy, that includes things like taking oil fields from ISIS and trying to run them for American profit, abandoning allies in the Middle East like the Kurdish people, denying visas to Iraqi citizens because of your Islamophobic bend to ban all travel from people from certain countries, the dismemberment of a historic deal that prevented what we consider to be a threatening nation from securing nuclear weapons, the behind closed doors consideration of assassinating or deposing world leaders like Assad or Maduro, or the expansion of North Korean intercontinental ballistic missile tests. I mean, we can go on and on and on. I mean, I agree. I don't think think we should bash Trump without looking at what he's done, because there's way more material to bash him for if we actually take a look at his hilariously inept position on foreign policy and all of the blunders that he's made time and time and time again throughout the very short amount of time that he's actually been president of the United States of America.
All right. Well, as you said, we could talk about it for a long time, but the problem is there's something called a vice presidential debate that's about to begin. We're less than a minute away. So I have to say goodbye to you guys, but thank you so much. Stephen Bonnell, thanks for being on. Michael Reckenwald, the author of Beyond Woke. Thank you guys very much for that debate. We appreciate your time tonight.
Thanks.
Okay.
All right. So I'm going to go ahead and let's bring in Lionel with Lionel Media. My friend Lionel, you got...
Okay. Debate now. Jesus fuck. All right. That was fun, I guess. Fucking competitive game that's ever been released on Twitch. Like, holy shit. Like, you're literally, your avatar is a fucking Teletubby, and you're getting this mad.